Alexander, sorry for the loss today. Do you think there is a big gap between Sinner and Alcaraz and the rest of the ranking?
Well, I think there's a big gap between Sinner and everybody else right now. It's quite simple. I think there's a big gap between Sinner and everybody else, and I think there's a big gap between Alcaraz, myself, maybe Novak, and everybody else. I think there's two gaps right now. But
one comment. That is all it took to set the entire tennis world on fire. Not a match result. Not a press conference meltdown. Just one man's opinion, delivered at the worst possible moment, and suddenly fans everywhere were at each other's throats. So what exactly did Alexander Zverev say? And more importantly, why did it land like a grenade in the middle of an already burning building? Here is what you need to understand before we go any further. This was not some random hot take dropped on a podcast. This came out during one of the most emotionally charged moments of the season, when tensions were already stretched to breaking point, when careers felt like they were on the line, and when the wrong word from the wrong person could blow the whole thing apart. And Zverev being Zverev, he said exactly what everyone else was quietly thinking but smart enough not to say out loud. He put Jannik Sinner above Carlos Alcaraz. Not slightly above. Clearly above. And when a man of Zverev's caliber, someone who has shared a court with both of them, goes on record and says that, you do not just scroll past that. You stop. You reread it. And then you pick a side. Now before you write Zverev off as someone stirring the pot for attention, hear him out, because his reasoning actually makes sense when you break it down. He argued that Alcaraz, for all his brilliance, is unpredictable in a way that can work against him. His creativity is electric on his best days, but on his worst? The errors pile up, the rhythm disappears, and suddenly the most talented player on the planet looks like someone going through the motions. That inconsistency is the crack in the wall that opponents target, and according to Zverev, it is a very real crack. Compare that to how Sinner has been playing, and you start to see what he means. Sinner does not dazzle you. He does not hit shots that make your jaw drop and leave you rewinding the highlight reel. What he does is grind you into the ground with a precision that almost feels mechanical. He puts the ball exactly where he wants it, at exactly the pace he chooses, again and again and again until you have nothing left. Zverev described him as a robot, and honestly, that is not an insult. In professional tennis, being a robot means being unbreakable. But here is where it gets complicated. And this is the part that most people glossed over while they were busy arguing on social media. Zverev did not just drop this opinion in a vacuum. He said it right in the middle of a semi-final against Alcaraz at the Australian Open. A match where Alcaraz was already dealing with a hand injury that had been quietly affecting his preparation for weeks. A match where something happened that would become just as controversial as anything Zverev said. Alcaraz called for a medical timeout because of cramping. And that is when everything exploded. Now on the surface, this seems like a routine moment. Players cramp all the time. Tennis is brutally physical, and when your body starts shutting down in the fifth set of a Grand Slam semifinal, you do what you have to do to keep competing. But Zverev did not see it that way. He pushed back hard, and he did not do it quietly. He argued openly and visibly that cramping caused by fatigue should not qualify for a medical timeout under the rules of the sport. His frustration was impossible to miss. And the moment it became public, the tennis world split straight down the middle. On one side, Alcaraz supporters were furious. They saw Zverev's reaction as disrespectful and unnecessary, like piling on a player who was already dealing with enough. For them, it was not about the rule. It was about decency. When someone is clearly suffering on the court, you do not stand there and question whether their pain is legitimate. You just let them get the treatment and get back to playing tennis. On the other side, there were those who quietly agreed with Zverev, even if they were not willing to say so publicly. They pointed to the inconsistency in how these rules are applied across the tour. Every player who cramps gets treatment. Every single one. The written rule and the actual practice are two completely different things. And that gap has created a gray area where no one really knows what the standard is anymore. From that angle, Zverev was not being cruel. He was saying what the rulebook says and pointing out that nobody actually follows it. But here is the question that nobody was asking loudly enough. Was Alcaraz even fully healthy going into that match? Because when you look at the timeline, this was not just about cramping in one match. The hand injury had been following him around for weeks, quietly eating away at the quality of his practice sessions, dulling the edge on his timing, and putting him in the impossible position of competing at the highest level of the sport while running on something less than a full tank. And for a player whose entire game is built on explosive movement, sharp reactions, and fearless shot-making, even a small physical limitation changes everything. It is like trying to run a race with one shoe. You can still do it, but you are not winning anything. Sinner, meanwhile, was doing the exact opposite of managing limitations. He was accelerating. While Alcaraz was navigating his way through recovery, Sinner was stacking practice session after practice session, sharpening patterns, building rhythm, and arriving at every match with the kind of physical confidence that comes from having done the work without interruption. And in elite sport, rhythm is not just an advantage. It is a weapon. The player who can train consistently without setbacks is almost always the player who looks sharper in the moments that count most. This is the part of the story that tends to get buried under all the controversy and the social media noise. The physical gap between these two players right now is not about talent. Talent-wise, Alcaraz might be the most gifted player on the planet. But talent that cannot be properly prepared is talent that cannot be fully expressed. And that is exactly the window that Sinner has been quietly sliding through. So when Zverev says Sinner is currently a better player than Alcaraz, is he wrong? Or is he just saying something that is temporarily true based on where both players are in this specific moment? Because that distinction matters enormously. One framing makes it a bold statement of fact. The other makes it an observation about a phase, not a verdict on an entire career. Think about what Alcaraz has already done. He has won multiple Grand Slams before his 23rd birthday. He plays a brand of tennis that players who faced both Roger Federer at his peak and Novak Djokovic at their best have openly said is actually operating at a higher technical level. The shots he produces, the variety he brings to the court, the way he can close out points in 3 completely different ways, through outright winners, by forcing errors, or by simply refusing to miss. That combination of tools is extraordinarily rare. Even Djokovic, arguably the greatest returner in history, never had that kind of offensive arsenal. Sinner, for all his brilliance, plays a different game. A narrower game in some ways. His power is elite. His ground strokes are relentless. His fitness is probably the best on the tour right now. But his game is built more on repetition and consistency than on unpredictability and variety. Against someone like Alcaraz who is fully fit and fully switched on, that actually becomes a limitation. Alcaraz at full strength creates problems that Sinner cannot solve the same way he solves problems against most other opponents. And that is the real story underneath all of this noise. This is not a permanent shift in the balance of power. This is a snapshot of a rivalry caught at an unusual moment, where one side is momentarily vulnerable and the other is peaking. Rivalries in sport are never straight lines. They twist, they flip, they produce results that nobody predicted, and then they flip again. The Sinner versus Alcaraz dynamic is going to keep doing exactly that for the next decade, and every time one of them looks finished, the other is going to remind everyone why that conclusion was premature. What Zverev did, whether intentionally or not, was accelerate the conversation. He took what was a slowly developing rivalry and injected it with a dose of controversy that forced everyone to pick a side and argue their case. And in doing that, he actually did the tennis world a favor, because rivalries do not become legends without friction. They need moments like this, uncomfortable, contentious, slightly unfair moments, to give them the weight and the narrative complexity that make people care deeply about the outcome. Because here is the truth that sits at the center of all of this. Nobody actually knows right now whether Sinner is genuinely better than Alcaraz or whether this is a window that Alcaraz's injury has temporarily opened. Nobody knows how long the recovery takes. Nobody knows whether Alcaraz comes back sharper and more motivated than ever, using Zverev's words as fuel. Nobody knows whether Sinner's current form holds, or whether the pressure of being labeled the best player in the world starts to affect him in ways that consistency alone cannot protect against. What we do know is that both of them are operating at a level that tennis has rarely seen from players this young. The speed of the game, the physical demands, the tactical sophistication, all of it has evolved beyond what even the greatest players of the previous generation were asked to produce. And these two are right at the cutting edge of where the sport is going. So the next time Zverev opens his mouth and says something that sets social media on fire, maybe instead of immediately reacting, it is worth asking a different question. Not whether he is right or wrong, but what he is seeing from inside that competitive bubble that the rest of us are missing from the outside. Because sometimes the most controversial opinion is just the honest one said out loud before everyone else is ready to hear it. And if Alcaraz comes back firing on all cylinders, reclaims his form, and proves that everything we just watched was nothing more than a speed bump on his way to something even greater, then Zverev's words will age like a bad prediction. But if Sinner keeps building, keeps improving, and starts collecting the kind of titles that turn consistency into legacy, then maybe the robot was always the one to bet on. Either way, tennis wins. And so do we.